Thank you very much for joining now. But to start off, for everybody who's watching, can you explain exactly what the observatory does and what your role is there?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Greg. I am the scientist in charge of the Cascades Volcano Observatory, basically the director of the observatory. And the Cascades Volcano Observatory is one of 5 volcano observatories within the USGS Volcano Hazard Program. We are responsible for monitoring volcanoes from Mount Baker up near the Canadian border down through Crater Lake down by the southern Oregon border. Our mission here at the Cascade Volcano Observatory is to conduct hazard assessments and research on the histories and processes of eruptions in our Cascades volcanoes, to monitor those volcanoes, to try to attempt to provide the earliest possible detection of any unrest that might be going on in order to provide early warning to local emergency management authorities, and to basically conduct outreach and education of local management authorities and the public to help make their communities volcano ready in the event of a future eruption of the Cascades.
I definitely want to talk about that side of things as well. Going back to, how many volcanoes are there within the range that you monitor?
Yeah, so right now we are monitoring, we have tabs on about 9 of the volcanoes within the Cascade range. Several years ago, the USGS did what they call a threat ranking of all the volcanoes within the United States and its territories. And your viewers may be surprised to know that among the 5 observatories within the Volcano Hazard Program, we are responsible collectively for monitoring some 160 active or potentially active volcanoes in the United States and its territories.
Wow.
Several years ago, a group of folks within the Volcano Hazard Program they call it a threat ranking or a threat analysis. And this is a kind of a ranking that is based upon the frequency of eruption of a volcano, the type of eruptions that the volcano undergoes, and the societal assets that may be at risk, be it communities or infrastructure or whatever. And the rankings ranged everywhere from very high threat volcanoes down to very low threat. Here in the Cascades, we actually have 8 volcanoes that are classified as very high threat volcanoes because of their frequency of eruption, the type of eruptions, and the societal assets potentially at risk, and 1 high threat volcano. So we pay close attention to those 9 volcanoes within the Cascade range.
So with that ranking, now I've got to know where that all stands. So what is the most, the highest risk volcano?
It depends on how you want to classify that. Mount St. Helens is definitely one of the ones that's considered very high threat simply because of the frequency of eruptions at Mount St. Helens. It's the most actively erupting volcano in the Cascades, and there are societal assets that aren't too far down valley and downwind of the volcano. But Mount Baker, Glacier Peak, Mount Rainier, Mount St. Helens, Mount Hood, Newberry Volcano, Three Sisters, and Crater Lake are the ones that are considered to be potentially very high threat. And then Mount Adams is one that's considered to be potentially high threat. Within the volcanoes here in the Cascades, as you're showing now, our volcanoes are all snow-clad, lots of snow and ice on our volcanoes. And because of that, that's a potential water source that's located on the volcanoes. So one of the big things we worry about here in the Cascades are what we call these large volcanic mud flows. That if a volcano erupts, that snow and ice can melt. That melting can then erode a bunch of the sediment that's on the volcanoes and down in the valleys that drain off the volcanoes. And it can send these large volcanic mud flows. And think of a river of cement slurry or a thick soupy milkshake. So that these flows can travel many, many tens of miles down valley. And so these are one of the biggest threats from our volcanoes in the Cascades, particularly to the communities to the west, because all our rivers ultimately end up draining to the west of the Cascades. But in addition to that, when these volcanoes erupt, they put big ash plumes up into the atmosphere, and the wind will carry that ash many tens, hundreds of miles downwind. And so the communities to the east of the Cascades, such as, for example, Spokane and places in eastern Washington and eastern Oregon, Their biggest threat is volcanic ashfall, as you're showing here. So those are the two big hazards we worry about here in the Cascades. Fortunately, most of our volcanoes are remote. We don't have lots of densely populated areas very close to the volcanoes. So a number of processes that these volcanoes are capable of, like lava flows and landslides and other types of processes that typically affect areas that are maybe within 15-ish, 20-ish miles of a volcano. We don't have a lot of assets other than maybe some infrastructure exposed very close to the volcanoes. But nevertheless, communities that are very far downwind or very far downstream are still potentially affected. The volcano will come to them, so to speak.
Right. I mean, I think looking at all of the old footage too of Mount St. Helens, as far as those lahars and the mud flow, coming down the river there and just knocking things out. I mean, you can still see the evidence of that today, which is definitely, nerve-wracking a little bit just being that close to it. Not that that happens that often. And I think, looking at it from that standpoint too of trying to monitor these, and make sure that you know what's going on. Can you walk us through that process, like the science behind that of how you monitor these volcanoes?
Sure, absolutely. So we sort of have, you can kind of think of three arrows in our quiver with regard to our monitoring. So as magma moves up toward this ground surface, it has to break a pathway. So it's got to break rock and make a pathway to the surface. And when it breaks that rock, it causes earthquakes. So one of the things we watch for around volcanoes are earthquakes. We look at the size of the earthquake, the frequency, how frequently they're happening. Are they changing depth as a function of time? So are they getting shallower, indicating that magma might be getting closer to the surface? So we've got an array of instruments across the landscape at these volcanoes to monitor for earthquakes. Another arrow in our quiver is monitoring of volcanic gases. So as magma approaches the surface, it will release some of the dissolved gases within the magma. And in particular, two gases we watch for are carbon dioxide, CO2, and sulfur dioxide, SO2. And so we periodically monitor the volcanoes. We have a group that can do overflights, and they can monitor from the air the volcanic gases that are being emitted by our volcanoes. And what they're watching for are changes in background level. The third arrow in our quiver is looking for changes in the ground surface. So think of a water balloon. As you pump more water into a water balloon, that water balloon is going to expand, and the surface of that water balloon is going to lift. And as magma approaches the surface of the earth, or if a magma chamber is really beginning to fill and swell with magma, the ground surface around the volcanoes will actually begin to uplift and deform a little bit. And we have technology, GPS technologies, very much like the GPS technologies in your car, allow us basically to measure very fine scale changes in the surface of the ground. And we can monitor that both with instruments we have on the ground. We have GPS sensors on the ground, and we can also monitor that with satellite technologies from space. So those are the three kind of main things we watch for. And depending on combinations of what we see, it can tell us whether or not magma is moving toward the ground surface, and then we can try to interpret whether that's going to ultimately end up in an eruption or not. I think one of the things that's really interesting is as your viewers will look across the landscape and they'll look at Mount Hood or Mount St. Helens or Mount Rainier or any of the other volcanoes, they look like these nice stately monoliths just sitting there very quietly on the landscape. And they're really anything but. These volcanoes are very chatty, some of them much more chatty than others. And so earthquakes are happening all the time. And Mount St. Helens, we get earthquakes all the time at Mount St. Helens. So one of the things that we try to do with our monitoring is we really want to understand what's typical background, typical behavior at these volcanoes. And the more instrumentation we have and the longer our records are, we get a better sense of what's kind of typical at these volcanoes. And then we want to watch for what's out of the ordinary, because it's what's out of the ordinary that gets our attention and will give us some information on whether the volcano might be building toward an eruption or not.
Well, I know there's been at least 6 earthquakes at Mount Hood over just the last couple of days or few days. Is that typical for that many earthquakes to be happening at Mount Hood?
Sure. So on Tuesday afternoon, there was a magnitude 3 earthquake that happened just a little bit south of the summit, but at a depth of about 1 or 2 miles below sea level. And this kind of earthquake has happened at Mount Hood in the past. In fact, there was another earthquake of a similar character that happened in about the same location at Mount Hood back in April, but it was a magnitude 2.2, so a little bit smaller. If you go back and look through the earthquake catalog, you will find that since about 1982, there have been over 20 earthquakes of this type that have occurred at Mount Hood in about the same location and of the same character. In 1989, there was a similar one that was about a magnitude 3.5. So the one that happened Tuesday is the largest one that's happened since about 1989. In addition to those types of earthquakes at Mount Hood, it's very common for Mount Hood to have sort of seasonal bursts of seismic activity a little bit further to the south, kind of south of government, down in the government camp area, maybe a little farther south. So this is very typical when we see this a lot. So at the moment, we're not too concerned. We're keeping an eye on it. I mean, if we start to see more of these types of earthquakes, or we start to see larger earthquakes, then of course that's going to get our attention, and we'll, definitely really start to pay pretty close attention. But right now, we've seen these types of earthquakes happen at Mount Hood in the past, so it's not out of the ordinary, but it's something to keep our eye on.
I don't know if there's a percentage you can put on it, as far as, obviously it is a volcano, it's an active volcano. What percentage would you say is the chance that this could erupt, say, in the next 15 years?
It's probably pretty low. I mean, the last several eruptive periods, in just really, really round numbers, Mount Hood last erupted, let's say, roughly 200 years ago, 2,000 years ago, and 20,000 years ago, really ballpark. I mean, those are really round numbers. So, is it due for an eruption? There's no due date, so to speak. So I think right now the probability of eruption at Mount Hood is relatively low. Perhaps the volcano that most likely will erupt again in the Cascades is Mount St. Helens. It's the one that's been by far the most active in the last several thousands of years. It's the one that has been the most recent eruptions, and so it's the one that's most likely to erupt again, particularly in our lifetimes. Just to give your viewers a little bit of kind of put things in context a little bit, when you average over, say, the last 10,000 years, we get about 2 eruptions per century in the Cascades. So on a single human lifetime, that's not very much, doesn't sound like much. But if you're thinking, if you're a land use planner or emergency management planner, you have to be thinking about generational timeframes when you're designing critical facilities and other things like that. And so, so 2 eruptions per century, yeah, that's something you probably have to think about a bit. But just to put it in context, wildfires occur all the time, annual basis. Floods occur on an annual basis. So we want our communities to be volcano ready. We want them to know if your local volcano should ramp up toward an eruption, what are the things you need to be concerned about? What are the hazards that are posed by that volcano? What are the things you should do should that volcano erupt? And so these are the kind of public education campaigns that we embark on with local authorities and the public, because we want the communities to be volcano ready, but I don't want anybody out there stressing out, worrying that, hey, my volcano in my backyard is going to explode at any minute.
Right. Well, let's talk about that. What do you do to be prepared? I mean, because we all live within the range, if you're in this side of the Cascades anyway, within the range of this. What should you be doing at home to be prepared just in case?
Well, first of all, just kind of educate yourself on what is the history of the volcano that's in your backyard. If you live in Portland, if you live in Hood River, if you live in, Sandy, if you live in a government camp, what has Mount Hood done in the past? What's its history? And we have lots of public materials available on our website. We have worked with lots of the local emergency management authorities. So just have a sense of what are the hazards. If you are living along a river valley that drains a volcano, yeah, chances are the biggest hazard you have to worry about are these large volcanic mud flows. So if a large volcanic mud flow came down a river valley, you should just have some sense of where is safe ground. So if there was some sort of a warning that was issued by local management authorities of a large volcanic mud flow in progress, just know where you should go. If you live in an area that's potentially affected by volcanic ash, then what should you do? most likely you would shelter in place. Just, don't go outdoors. If volcanic ash is falling, stay indoors, shelter in place. If you do need to go out, wear a mask that's reasonably decent fitting mask around your mouth because you don't want to breathe in the volcanic ash. You know, make sure you have, like with any other hazard in the Pacific Northwest, make sure you have supplies on hand for a few days, have plenty of water to last a few days, have plenty of food to last a few days in case you can't get out to the stores. So just the typical normal precautions that you would use for almost any other emergency that you might have. So just educate yourself about, like I said, what the hazards are, know what the particular hazard is in your location, and know what to do if something on that order was to happen.
So general preparedness, kind of like
Exactly.
you prepare for an earthquake or anything
Exactly.
else, having that emergency kit and knowing where to go. I think that is key to find that higher ground. That's definitely something to think
Exactly.
about. Anything else that people should be concerned with, with Mount Hood? Obviously, you said it's nothing to be concerned with right now as far as the earthquakes, but something else you think people should be aware of?
Nothing in particular. Like I said, Mount Hood, it's one of the volcanoes. It's had a history of shedding large volcanic mud flows. They've gone down the Sandy River, the Hood River, the White River. So just be aware. One of the other things that sometimes happens at Mount Hood are these mud flows that they come down. They're not associated with volcanic activity, but there's a lot of loose material up on the flanks of the volcano. And sometimes in the late summer, if we get rapid snow melt, rapid melt of glaciers that can release water floods. Sometimes in the fall, if we get heavy rains that can mobilize some of the sediment, you'll get smaller mud flows that will, run down maybe a few miles off the volcano. And so if you happen to be along the river valleys and you kind of hear a rumbling noise, know how to get to high ground, recognize what that is. Back in, I think it was 2006 or so, there was a late fall, we had a pretty intense rainstorm, and it triggered these volcanic mud flows on a lot of our volcanoes, Mount Hood, Mount St. Helens, Mount Adams, Mount Rainier. There's some people I know there's a photo floating around on the internet of a bridge that's just covered in boulders, and that's actually the Highway 35 bridge that goes over the White River. So, in the fall time in particular, just be a little bit aware that that's the season when some of these seasonal mud flows tend to occur on our volcanoes. And like I said, they occur close to the volcanoes. They don't go far away, but White River's an area where a lot of people like to hike. So, just be cognizant of what the weather is. And like I said, if you hear kind of unusual rumbling noise coming down the valley, just, make sure you can get out of the valley.
Be aware of that. Yeah, if you hear a rumbling noise, I would definitely be aware, a little bit nervous on that. Well, since I have you on here, and I've got a genuine volcano expert, I thought if I could, pull this up. I've got actually a live shot here from Hawaii of the big eruption that's been going on, and that's certainly been in the news lately too. Can you tell us, what we're looking at here, what's going on with this one?
Sure. This is Kilauea Volcano in Hawaii National Park. And up near the summit of Kilauea, there's a big, we call it a caldera, a big crater. Think of a big soup bowl. And what's happening is that there's a lava lake within the soup bowl. And a few days ago, a new batch of magma worked its way up to the surface, and it broke its way up through the lake and through the crust covering the lake. And we began to have a new eruption at Kilauea Volcano. Kilauea is one of the most active volcanoes in the world. Your viewers may recall that in 2018, Kilauea, rather than having the magma erupt upward and come out in the crater up near the summit of the volcano, the magma actually went down what we call a rift zone. So it moved laterally or horizontally away from the magma chamber as opposed to vertically. And it actually came up on the ground, up out of the ground through a series of what are called fissures and popped up in the middle of a neighborhood. Since that time, Kilauea has mostly been erupting in the summit. Last November, its sister volcano, Mauna Loa, erupted. And for a while, both Mauna Loa and Kilauea were erupting together. In the middle of December, the eruption of Mauna Loa stopped. And I think it was sometime around January or February, the eruption in the crater of Kilauea also stopped. And so we had a bit of a pause. And now a couple days ago, the eruption began to renew in the crater of Kilauea. So what you're looking at is basically the crust. Think of a bowl of soup with a solid crust across the top. French onion soup, if you will, right? If you've ever had a French onion soup, you get the melted cheese and the croutons, and it makes a bit of a crust on the surface, and you got all the liquid soup underneath it. That's what you're looking at here. You've got a crust on the surface of a lava lake within the caldera of the Kilauea volcano. Underneath all that crust, we've got a lot of molten lava. We got a lava lake, but this is the crust. And so what's happening, I see some nice fresh lava there right in the middle. There's a crack in the crust and lava's coming out.
Wow. So very, very hot French onion soup. That's all I'm going to think about when I look at that. Well, Jon, thank you very much for taking some time to talk with us too. This is really, really interesting, just learning about this and, knowing we don't have to worry about Mount Hood necessarily erupting right now. We're not going to have our own Kilauea here in the near future anyway, most likely. But all your information was great. And I know people, you said, can go find out more and educate themselves. Can you tell them where to go to do that?
Yeah, sure. One place is to go to our Cascades Volcano Observatory website. We have lots of information there. You can look for us at the USGS Volcanoes Twitter account. We're always posting information on there. Same with the USGS Facebook account. And we actually have what we call our volcano notification service. And that's something people can actually sign up for. And you will get emails sent to you whenever we put out updates or information statements, and you can restrict it to just the Cascades volcanoes, or you can get information on all the volcanoes from all the observatories. And so if people were interested in Kilauea, the Volcano Notification Service was sending out information statements about what was going on at Kilauea here. But one thing I'll just leave your viewers with is that, if any of the volcanoes begin to act up or start to show signs of potentially moving into unrest, we will certainly be putting out information. And so if people have any questions, there's a lot of stuff oftentimes that gets posted on Twitter that's misinformation. And so if people are really curious, come to us. We'll be the trusted authority. We're not trying to hide anything from people. So if people have any questions, visit us at our website. You can send us questions and we will answer them.
Jon, thank you very much. This has been really nice having you on here. Appreciate you joining us. Thanks for your time. And I will be going there to find out more about the volcanoes.
Okay, great. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
Thanks, Jon. And thank you, everybody, for joining in today, too. Really appreciate all of you being a part of the show. This is Fox 12 Now, so this is our live digital streaming program here from the Fox 12 Oregon newsroom. So that's what's kind of going on behind me right there. And we're live every weekday at 1 p.m. Pacific, so make sure that you tune in for that. And we also have all of our videos available. Go to the YouTube page, youtube.com/Fox12Oregon. Go into the live section there. You can check out all of our interviews, all the different things that we've covered. Lots of different things there. You can leave comments if you want. I'll read some of them, maybe not all of them, but I'll read them. I may not respond to all of them. But regardless, go there and check out all of our videos and download our apps as well. All right, that's it for today. I'm going to leave you with that shot right there. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Greg Nibbler. This is Fox 12 Now. Jon, thank you so much. That was great.